The Summit Planning Committee was together having a conversation about this theme, that everyone is a teacher of literacy. I thought that Dr. Ernest Morrell was someone who fully embodies that theme. And in fact, as I thought about it, he might just change it slightly. He might say everyone is a critical literacy teacher, or everyone is a multiple literacies teacher. So I'd like to explore a little bit what I mean by that. I first came to know Dr. Morrell when I was sitting in a doctoral level literacy class, and he was co-teaching. And then he sat in on my dissertation committee. He taught, and I was schooled. As a white, privileged female teacher of struggling learners, and a teacher of teachers of struggling learners, I came into that learning experience with big visions, a big heart, a well-prepared big load of knowledge, and very thin understanding of critical and multiple literacies. And it was the piece I needed to make any meaning out of the vision and the heart and the soul of what I was doing. Dr. Morrell helped open up a space for me. And in that space, he helped me see where this belief in the capacity of all learners could be met if accessed along with culturally responsive, real-world teaching that access the intrinsic literate nature of all people. Ernest is a critical and multiple literacies teacher. You know, I suppose that it was just something that was inevitable. Mom's a teacher, dad's a preacher, high school English teacher, university literary and literacies and literature teacher. He still has the identity of an English teacher, I think, because he's still supporting those folks. With all of those experiences that led to his own literate identity, I think it was in part just the amazing power of word. Ernest loves words. Ernest loves words, and you can tell when you look at his bio. 75 articles, book chapters, 6 books. He likes words. He also likes the play of words. If you do some online surfing, you will see he's a poet, he's a playwright, he will passionately help teachers think about hip-hop. He will talk about how hip-hop awakened the possibility of voice in his own soul and mind. He loves to think about how word can be revealed explicitly or hidden, how it shows up in movement, how it shows up in visuals, how it shows up in popular culture, and how it should show up in our teaching lessons. Ernest loves words. He loves to play with words. Ernest loves and respects the power of words, and he asks powerful questions. They're simple, but they're powerful. He might ask a question like this: so, are you going to get the kids excited? So, how are you going to get the kids to believe in themselves? So how will you have kids believe in themselves as readers and writers and thinkers and communicators and social activists? How are you going to have kids not just be consumers, but producers of literacy? Ernest loves words. He loves the play of words. He loves the power of words, and he loves how words empower people, especially our urban youth, but all youth for sure. Ernest doesn't just write about critical consciousness, he lives it. He weaves his scholarship and his experiences as a football coach and his love of hip hop into ways in which he can incite imagination and sharpen the skills of teachers and of learners. For you see, he believes that if we incite imagination, if we believe in the possibility and sharpen the skills, that we can move students off of dismal statistic sheets and move them onto vans and buses, which he does. And they go on learning excursions. They might go to the state capitol, where as social activists, they speak to having more funding for education. They might pile out at the American Educators Research Association and talk to some of the brightest minds around in academia about their participatory action research. So Ernest Morrell recognizes that there is great scholarship and capacity in the minds of our students who might appear to be struggling. And he works hard at showing how the love of words can empower them and their voice. He believes in the capacity of their mind. He believes in their right to have a voice, to voice their mind. And he believes that by voicing their mind, they can make positive social change. Ernest Morrell is a critical and multiple literacies teacher. He knows that producers of literacy at every age can produce hope. And Ernest Morrell is one of the most hope-filled literacies teachers I've had the pleasure to be schooled by. He will not tell you to turn off your cell phones. In fact, if you hear a word you like, he might encourage you to tweet that. #WeTeachLiteracy. So without further ado, I'd like to have you join me in welcoming Dr. Ernest Morrell to speak with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much. All right, well, good afternoon. Oh, there's a lot of, good afternoon? Yeah, that's better, that's better. I'm on the podium behind the pulpit, so I'm going to invoke my dad a little bit. Deborah said my dad's a teacher. He'd get a kick out of this, having me up here. It's such a privilege to be back in Michigan. I don't know if Deborah mentioned in the biography, but I spent several years here as a professor at Michigan State, which is where I met her. And well, there's a couple of other Spartans. I don't want to get in that battle in Grand Rapids because I know this is kind of like neutral territory, right? I'm kind of in the middle of a couple of different institutions. But I don't remember schooling Deborah on her dissertation. I just remember that it was great. Voluminous. It was a weighty tome of a dissertation, but it was great. And I know that you're very happy to have her as a member of the faculty. But it's good to be back. It's especially good to be back in September. If this was a December literacy conference, that would be a different experience in Michigan that I had living here for several years. But wow, 70 degrees and sunny, and you cannot beat Michigan in early fall. So it is such a privilege to be here and to talk about issues that really matter to me a good deal. And I think that the Community Literacy Initiative brings together two issues that matter to me a great deal. One of those issues is community, and this idea that education is a part of not just helping people to do better for schooling, but about being productive members of society and communities. The other thing that matters to me is literacy. And how can literacy not only be a way for kids to be able to get through school, but literacy is a way for young people to be able to share their voice. So I'm going to talk to you today about both of those things and how they come together in my work. I'm just going to take a moment here and pull up my slides. Apparently it shut off during the introduction, so I'll go ahead and get it back. Here we go. All right, woke back up. All right, so the talk is developing powerful readers and writers through critical community engagement. I think a lot of us have the first part of this statement. We want to develop powerful readers and writers. And one of the things that I've learned, this is my 23rd year as an educator, is it's possible, but it depends on how you do it. The through, whatever you put at the end here, for me it's critical community engagement, but the question is, under what context is it not only desirable, but necessary to become a powerful reader or writer? When you are able to find that context, you don't have to worry about becoming powerful readers and writers because it is necessary and inevitable. But a lot of times we create literacy situations where that's not inevitable. It could be seen as something that is foreign, it could be seen as something that is boring, it could be seen as something that I can't do or I shouldn't do. If we look historically, though, this idea of literacy in social movement is much older than the idea of literacy in school. Primary literacy learning, up until 100 years ago, happened in community organizations like churches. As a matter of fact, one of the most powerful literacy movements in the history of literacy education happened during the Protestant Reformation in the 17th century. Literacy has been a part of family, it's been a part of neighborhood, it's been a part of all sorts of organizations, freedom schools in the South where slaves were learning to read, even though it was illegal, punished under penalty of severe whipping or death. So this idea of connecting literacy to a social movement is not something that's new to the 21st century. As a matter of fact, it's older than schooling itself. And I think we need to tap into that tradition. And we think about, for me, the questions I asked, the questions that Deborah asked as part of the introduction is, what could we learn from looking at literacy as a social movement that might help us with our social movements, but also help us with this movement of creating equitable and powerful schooling for kids, for all kids? Because those movements were largely successful. As a matter of fact, many of those movements led to universal literacy. People think that we got schools and then we got universal literacy. There were many nations in Europe, and it was even happening in the United States, where universal literacy preceded schools, public schooling. These societies became literate because communities decided it was necessary to become literate. Certainly schools help, but this idea of literacy as a mass movement is something that has been owned by communities, as I said, for some time. So we think about these images, right? And I'll have a lot of images that I'll share of kind of what I think learning looks like, what powerful learning can look like. So you see these pictures here on this particular slide. And then we'll go to a couple of other slides that may show us a little bit of what the problem is when we think about literacy in schools and why kids may be turned off to it. This idea of what it means to be educated, what it means to be learned, has been fundamentally shaped by the industrial schooling moment of the late 19th century and the 20th century. So what you have in the slide that's all around you is a picture of women in a sewing factory about 1912. And 1912 is an important year because that was about the time that we went to universal public schooling in the United States and the Western world. And so those schools were created primarily to help people to acquire jobs like the jobs that these women have. So all of our notions of learning, all of our notions of literacy in that particular moment were tied up in this idea of creating workers for the industrial Western society. So you look at this question I ask, what does it mean to be educated, and what does it mean to educate? And you can see similarities between these two photos, right? That all of a sudden, literacy went from something that was a part of a movement, a part of being connected to your community, your faith, social justice, freedom, to a corporate exchange. And so the way you had to learn literacy in that particular situation is to be docile. I'll show this picture to elementary students, high school students. Like, what do you think made a good worker in this particular situation? Someone who's quiet, someone who sat with their head down, someone who followed directions, someone who spoke only when spoken to. And that's what we got for the first 100 years or so of American public schooling, particularly literacy education. It's no wonder that so many people said, hey, this is not for me. Right? This is not something that I want to do. It's not something that is inevitable for me to do. It doesn't even necessarily feel like something that's empowering. And that's a lesson that educators have to take away. Don't think that all literacy is empowering. Only powerful literacy is empowering. And so the question is, am I empowering through literacy or am I imposing through literacy? Because literacy can be an imposition as well as an emancipation. The question is, what kind of literacy education are we talking about? What kind of community engagement are we talking about? And that frame becomes very important, right? If we want to move away from this, I have colleagues who did research in the 60s and said when they began doing research, the average student spoke in class 7 minutes a year. A year, right? I can imagine what that might have been, right? You raise your hand and you're like, what is the Declaration of Independence, right? 4, right? You're yelling out answers. Answers that were already someone else's answers and giving them back to that person. But most of the time, you were spoken to. And literacy was about learning someone else's agenda and using someone else's words. Deborah talked about me as loving words, but our traditional model of literacy education doesn't always facilitate a love of words because the words are not your own. When we think about it in the narrow confines of this industrial era of schooling. But I think we're exploding that now, right? And embracing the entire legacy of why people have learned to become readers and writers. What role has that played in their lives, in their loves, in their passions, in who they feel they are in solidarity with, in their justice-making trajectory, in their world-changing trajectory? When we reinfuse that kind of power in literacy education, whether you're talking about in a community organization or a classroom or a church, all of a sudden you've got near universal buy-in, right? And you've got children, teachers, adults, advocates clamoring for powerful literacy learning experiences because they recognize that this is something that's going to help me to make the kind of difference I want in the world. So this is a little bit of a different image of why it may be important to have literacy, or what it may even look like to learn literacy, or what it may look like to use the literacy that you've learned. Right? So I'm going to challenge, not necessarily to say we don't need formal classroom instruction, but the instruction has to be in a different context, toward a different end, for a different purpose. And even that instruction has to look different. I've been in situations like this with children and young adults who, after participating in something like a movement for quality schools for all kids, comes back into the classroom as a very different student. No one has to tell her it's important to do your homework. She wants to do her homework because she recognizes that becoming an intellectual will make me powerful, right? I can be a movement maker. Is much more important as a lure into the literacy learning exchange than do this or else I'm going to call your parents. Right? What is the intrinsic and positive motivation that we invite and welcome people into a literacy community as opposed to imposing literacy as some kind of a threat? So I have a couple of questions. Deborah already stole a little bit of the thunder, but I'm going to repeat some of those questions. How do we get communities excited about becoming powerful readers and writers? These are 2 books by a colleague of mine. He actually spoke for me last year at Columbia. His name is Charles Payne. He talks about the importance of literacy in the civil rights movement. And this Teach Freedom was a book that I was able to be a part of. But he talks about education for liberation. Liberation gets people excited. Speaking the truth to power gets people excited. Social justice gets people excited. Fairness, equity, that gets people excited. And to be powerful in those sorts of movements, it's important to become a reader and writer. But, and this is one of the key takeaways, when literacy is the end and not the means, you will have problems. Right? I'll say that again. When it is the ends and not the means, you will have problems. You need to be a reader. It's only going to convince the people who are already strong readers. We need to do something about environmental injustice. But in order to do that, you have to be a powerful reader or writer. That's a difference. We get people excited because they care about the ends. The ends have something to do with their real lives, their real everyday experiences. The means become a pathway toward that end. Reading and writing is a part of becoming all sorts of other things that matter to you and your family, past, present, and future. That's important. We get them excited by focusing on the ends. But let's think together about what some of those ends are that might get a kid, an adult, a community advocate excited enough to embrace the challenge of becoming a powerful reader or writer. The second question is related to the first, and that is, how do we develop these literate identities? Right? What does it mean to read is very different than what it means to be a reader. To read is an activity. Becoming a reader is a lifelong choice. So I don't talk about reading and writing, I talk about readers and writers. I want people who embrace that as their identity. This isn't just a task that's separated from me. It's not just something I do when I need to write. A writer is who I am. A writer is a part of how I see the world. And we can invite young people as early as preschool, elementary, to become powerful readers and writers, right? To develop those identities. To have that tied to what I do in my community, what I do in Grand Rapids, what I do in the state of Michigan, what I do as a teenager, what I do as a member of my faith, right? Important in that enterprise is becoming a powerful reader and writer. The third question is, what kind of education do our young people need? Right? Not the kind of education that we're used to providing for them, or the kind of education we're trained to provide. I got my credential in 1992, 1993. There was no internet. Right? In order to be relevant 22 years later as an educator, I have to think about what these kids need. Not what I was trained to do in 1976 in kindergarten with my viewfinder was my technology. Polite laughs from those that are old enough, then some people are whispering to their college professor, what's a viewfinder, right? It was this, it didn't plug into anything, I'll put it that way, right? So there are none left on the planet probably, except for in attics of people my age. This young girl is about the age of my youngest child, which it pains me to say, but my youngest child will graduate high school in the year 2030. Ouch, right? Doesn't that hurt? For some of us that hurts, right? Because we won't be as young as we are now, put it that way. But these kids they'll forget 21st century, these kids will live into the 22nd century. Right? There are tons and tons of people on the planet right now that will live and be healthy into the 22nd century. So we have to think about what they need from us. Right? How they need us to think differently. They don't need the 19th century industrial model of education to be productive and courageous moving into the 22nd century. My son will probably retire from whatever his professional pursuits are somewhere around the year 2070. But he starts kindergarten in a year or two. Right? They're coming to you in a year or two. My oldest son is in high school, and he was, gulp, born in the year 2000. Right? In 3 or 4 years from now, every kid in American education will be a millennial. So what do they need from us? How do they need us to think differently? And how do we need to think differently in order to get them excited and to develop the identities? So now I'll share a few examples of what this might look like and why it's important. The first thing we have to think of, this is that teacher and preacher that Deborah talked about, my parents. They look pretty good for being in their 70s, right? They look good. So both my parents are educators, and so they've been educators almost 50 years now each. And one of the things I think that's important about this idea of literacy, learning, and community is that we need to think about not only literacy, but the act of teaching. What does it mean to teach? You say everyone is a literacy teacher. What does it mean to teach? Does it mean to follow curriculum, to follow standards, to give examinations? Or is teaching about an intimate transaction to help make someone a different kind of person? To do something together with that person, a shared passion, a shared love. Teaching is about life-changing. And I think we need to think about that. You cannot just throw a book at a child, whether you are the parent, a grandparent, a literacy coordinator. Teaching absent an act of passion, dare I say love, is not a teaching that's going to be empowering. You cannot teach who you do not love. And you cannot teach absent love. And teaching is an intimate transaction. Whether you are teaching your child how to tie her shoe, or whether you're teaching your grandparent how to use your iPad, right? Think about the situations where you are a teacher, and think about how most of the time that is motivated or connected by love. Why would it be any different in a community-based organization or a classroom? Those ideas about teaching that we have in our everyday lives are the same ideas that we need to bring with us into the classroom. Right? Teaching is an act of love. And literacy teaching has to be about cultivating voices. Literacy should help me to say things that I want to say. It should help me to feel like I can say the things that I want to say and need to say. that I can read something and react to it, that I am able to be a powerful speaker through the written word, through the spoken word, through digital technologies, that I can say things to change people's minds. Because there's so many things as we think about the schools that we have, the communities that we have, the inequities that we have. There are so many minds that we need to change in the world today. And we need our young people and their parents and grandparents to help us in that enterprise. When literacy teaching is about cultivating your own voice to say the things that matter to you, literacy learning is something that you can embrace. And how can you be bad at cultivating your own voice? It's difficult, isn't it? When it's about cultivating someone else's voice, when it's about silencing my voice, the president talked at lunch about multilingualism. When literacy is about getting rid of things that matter to me, it's very hard for me to embrace the act of becoming literate. Because what it's saying is to be literate means to be not like me. When to be literate means being ultimately like yourself. And that's one of the things that I think is a part of a shift as we move into this post-industrial era age of schooling, that it's not about consuming other people's voices, it's about producing your own and sharing your own. And that is a challenge as we try to cultivate the voices of a new generation of people to change the planet. I'm going to skip over this slide. I'll just say a couple of things about this. This is the one big theory slide I put in here. And it deals with the question of why people are not motivated to do things in school, right? This is a body of research that really changed my life as an educator. It essentially says two things. It's a mouthful. It says the expectancy value theory of motivation, but it means to motivate people, two things have to happen. One, you have to have an expectation of success or confidence. If I do not feel like I can be successful in what you're asking me to do, I will not do it. So in order for me to embrace the literacy learning challenge, I have to have some expectation that I can be successful. The second is value or relevance. If the task is relevant to me, I will be motivated. I will talk later on in this presentation about a group of parents who joined this enterprise that we embarked upon with students. Many of them had no more than a middle school education, but they decided this is something that I want to do. I want to read these empirical works in sociology and research, and I want to go speak to mayors and governors because the issues you're talking about are valuable to me. I have seen this change schools. I have seen this change organizations. When we pitch literacy as something that everyone should expect to be successful in becoming, and when we center that becoming in things that are valuable to the students and their communities, all of a sudden we have that engagement. And one of our biggest challenges, whether we are organizers or educators or both, is the challenge of engage. How do we get people engaged? You get them engaged when they know they can be successful and when you ask them what they would like to do and you center the work around that. Okay, so how does that translate, and what is the work that we've been doing past almost 20 years? The first principle is basically that slide. Young people of all ages are motivated to participate in causes they believe in. If you want to create a literacy moment, ask people what they believe in. And think about how can we center the literacy learning in that. I teach a class in literacy at Columbia, and we were looking at these successful campaigns, and whether it's learning to read the Bible or because you're a part of a social movement, when people attach that literate identity to something that they valued or believed in, whole societies became literate almost overnight in short amounts of time. I mean, you can look at a number of examples. People know most famously the Cuba campaign that was in the 1960s, where the whole nation went from a 50% literacy rate to a 97% literacy rate in 9 months. But even in the 17th century in Sweden, the nation went from about a 50% literacy rate to basically a 100% literacy rate in 6 months. The nation in 6 months as part of a Protestant Reformation. It was something they believed in. They did not have public schools, they did not have a ton of money, but what they had was a shared belief. And that shared belief led to a universal literacy. That country's been universally literate since, over 300 years. Cuba's had a 99% plus literacy rate for the past 40 or 50 years. So what do people believe in? That's a question I've been asking as an educator. I'll talk about this council of research that I've been a part of. All these pictures are pictures of me, my students, the parents, the community members that I've been working with on this project since the late 1990s. So I'll talk a little bit about how we got into that project, the work that we're doing, how that work might connect to what you all are doing or would like to do, what results we've seen in terms of the kind of literacy that young kids are developing, the literacy that communities are developing, what that means in terms of our advocacy for social justice and change in the neighborhoods where we've been working and the kinds of movements we've been able to foment. So I'll talk a little bit about this term that I'll use, participatory action research. And that's an important term, just to wrap your mind around so that after this talk you can go and look for some resources on it. It basically means a couple of things. And this is a picture of some of our youth. This was the front page of the Los Angeles Times, a paper with a circulation of over 3 million. Those are our kids in that picture. But participatory action research means 3 things, at least. 1, it means the collective investigation of a problem, people participating together. It means those who are most implicated in a set of social situations are those that should be researching them. It's fine to have people from Calvin or Columbia doing work, but if it's an issue in the Grand Rapids community, it's even more powerful than when the people in Grand Rapids are doing that work. And it's research that's connected to action. So it's not just about making a presentation. It's not just about writing a book or an article. It's about changing the world. It has to involve the people who are impacted on a day-to-day basis. It has to be collective, and it has to be geared towards some social action. And these young people were, you can kind of read it, students teach educators about school. These were young people that were talking about the incredible dropout rate in Los Angeles for kids who look like them and were from their neighborhoods, and what they thought the mayor should do about that. This is a project I'll talk about, more and more, but 12 years running in this project, we had 100% high school graduation rate for every kid involved. 100%. 100%. Right? And that becomes important when you think about what it actually means to get engaged. And when you find yourself on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, hey, guess what? That inspires you to become a more powerful reader and writer. This is another slide here of some of our young people doing research. And so you see that we allow the students to give themselves names. This group called themselves Team Crisis, Critical Researchers Investigating Solutions in Society. Right? When I see that title, I have a sense these kids are on the right trajectory. They're going to be all right. Right? Because they've begun to embrace that literate identity. They've begun to get excited about being people who investigate solutions, right? Not just problems. Because when you're outside of a community, it's easy to focus on problems. When you live in a neighborhood, what you want are solutions. And if no one's going to bring you those solutions, you have to create them yourself, right? I tell kids, you be mad enough to become an intellectual, right? You resist with your excellence. Because nobody's going to do it for you. And if you don't empower yourself, you're at the mercy of others. Right? You have to become that critical researcher investigating solutions in your own society. You owe it to the people you love. You owe it to the people who came before you. You owe it to the people who are coming after you. But we have to create those contexts. Right? I don't say, I want you to be a powerful essay writer. I want you to read a 300-page book. What do you want to change? Well, you might want to look at this. Right? Because this will help you to change it. It may be a 300-page book. You might want to write your senator. It might require writing an essay. But for us, the essay and the book are part of critical researchers investigating solutions in society. Right? Here's another example. These are our parent groups, and you can look up parent U-turn, like a U-turn, the traffic U-turn, and Mary Johnson. These are some of the parents I talked about. This is from an online journal we used to have. This is a woman, Mary Johnson. That's the woman in the picture with her hands like this. And this is a website where she's writing an open letter to the president. At that time, it was President Bush. And part of it says, "Sir, this is a rich country, and no child should go without a book, cafeteria, gym, clean and safe building, and credentialed teachers. But in my community, all the things I have listed above is what our students don't have." That's an invitation to becoming a powerful reader-writer. So Mary Johnson and a few other parents created this group, Parent U-Turn. She's now the author of several books. She's been an advisor to the mayor, to the superintendent in this community. They have organized parents. They have worked with young people. They have worked with community-based organizations. They have gotten rid of bad superintendents. They have been on the committee to hire new superintendents. They've increased graduation rates and literacy rates in their neighborhood. But it was all a part of becoming something that mattered, fixing the conditions in our schools. So we think about two major outcomes of this kind of a moment. The first one is, what does it mean for civic engagement? Right? And this is one of those now high school graduates, Brandon, who we met. This was a student who was on the verge of dropping out. This is less than a year after that, with a PowerPoint that he made, wearing a suit and tie, speaking to a room with about this many people about demands that he has for changes in the school system. So he's becoming a community agent. And that's an important outcome for us. We don't just measure success and how an individual does on his or her test scores. What changes have we made? How is the community a different place? How are the schools a different place? How are we in a different kind of a situation now than we were when we started because of this work? This is a YouTube page that the students created called The Heart of the Revolution. Right, and they made public service announcements, and so this is one part of them embracing that identity of becoming a civic agent. One of the things you see, though, is that this becoming a civic agent in both these situations requires literacy. Traditional literacies, new literacy. So it's not that they're really separate. They're just two different ways for us to begin to measure what these outcomes are and whether or not we're being successful. The second is, how does this activity of being involved in community research lead to academic excellence? On two fronts, for the individual students, and two, for changing our schools and our school systems. How can we do research that changes the school so all of a sudden, I was in New Mexico last week, with a superintendent in one of the neighborhoods there. It's like, we've increased our graduation rate from 42% to 70% in 3 years. Right? I've been in schools in New Jersey where they doubled their graduation rates from 38% to over 80% in 5 years. Right? And they were both parts of community efforts. Right? Community efforts. It's happening around us every day. So how do we use something like the Community Literacy Initiative to transform schooling in our own communities? Right. So now I'm going to share a few examples of the work that we've done. And this may resonate with some things that you're doing, some of the principles behind it, some of the things that I'd like to invite you to be a part of with us as we try to make this a national movement. This first one are fourth graders, and the teacher is actually this gentleman with the glasses right here. These are his students. They were doing community-based research, and I should preface this by saying this is a 10-year running project. The first generation of these students who are in Watts, which is in South Los Angeles, are now sophomores in college. They're part of that 100% graduation rate. When he started this, they were doing research on other issues in their community. There was an ice cream man who used to come after school every day and sold toy guns in the community. Watts is basically a 12 square block radius that has 25% of all the criminal activity, violent criminal activity of Los Angeles County in the 12 square block radius of Watts. And here's the ice cream man coming into the neighborhood selling toy guns after school. But these kids were already en route to becoming powerful readers and writers. They said, you know what we need to do? We need to boycott the ice cream man. Boycott the ice cream man. But even further than that, what they did, they researched. They went to the Department of Justice. They researched statistics on violence in their neighborhood and violent crimes. They asked the teacher for permission to put on a conference at their school to teach all their classmates about this. They created these posters, and they called the media. So they had the conference at school. They said, when the ice cream truck comes after school, the media is going to be here. We're going to run out with these signs, and this is what we're going to do. These pictures were taken by a local newspaper. Right? Boycott the ice cream man. Two things happened. The ice cream man didn't come back, which was good for their health in many ways, right? So the parents are clapping, the ice cream, gone. But these kids also had the highest test scores in the sub-district over a 7-year period. Math and English. We brought these kids to the university when they were 8th and 9th graders. They got college credit in the courses we taught. And now many of them, I know for a fact, a couple of them are now teachers in that community. They're that old. When you embrace this identity, you become a world changer, whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old. And no one has to tell you to pick up a book to read or to write something, because these become authentic activities that are part of your world-changing self. This is a question that we ask as we start all of our activities. We start with 2 questions. I don't go in necessarily with a curriculum in this work. If you could change the world, what's one thing you would change? I've been asking this question almost the same way for more than 20 years, to kids as young as 5 or 6, to adults and communities and churches and organizations around North America, really. If you could improve life in your school or community, what's one thing you would change? And we begin there. Well, how might we do it? What could we begin doing? What do we need to learn? What resources do we need? What strengths do we already have? What can we tap into? Who would we talk to if we found the information that we want? How do we get a hold of that person? What would make it most effective? How do we get our friends and neighbors to become involved with us? And guess what? You've got a literacy curriculum. But you've got a whole lot more. You've got a social action project. And I hate an education that these are talked about as antithetical to one another. Make your literacy curriculum a social action project, and you will have higher literacy and a better society. Point blank, right? So we go through this process, and hopefully you can get this. So I'm happy to make this available to you, however, because this is really important. We begin with identifying a problem. Don't take a problem to a community. Right? The community will tell you the problems that it has, whether you're talking about 4-year-olds who, want more graham crackers, or whether you're talking about parents who want, more libraries, right, in their neighborhood. We had a neighborhood in Los Angeles. There were 158 liquor stores to 1 library. And we geoplotted it. We used geographic information system software and plotted all the liquor stores. And I grew up in California where I never saw a liquor store go out of business. They must have been subsidized by some government. Never go out of business, even if 2 were on the same block. 1 library, right? So people know the problems that they want to confront if you ask them. How do we turn that into a question? How do we turn that into a study? How do we collect information? How do we process that information? How do we make meaningful evidence-based arguments based on that information? How do we share it via written, via spoken, via social media, via visual media? And how do we take action around what we've learned? That's the cycle. Right? Find me a Common Core standard or any other learning standard that doesn't fit in that cycle. I will be very surprised. There's nothing that we can't teach by doing this. And I mean that. Nothing that's worth teaching that we can't teach by doing this. So this is a Critical Minds project. This one is from Los Angeles. This was a school in East Los Angeles where I began working with a teacher. I think that the book that you have out there is, this teacher is actually one of the authors. She was in her 1st or 2nd year teaching. They gave her a 9th grade class of students that were on the verge of dropping out. Basically 80% of these freshmen that were in this class would drop out of high school. And they were running her crazy. There was 14 boys out of 20 students. They put her in this little bungalow outside the school where it was hot in a 2-hour block after lunch. Yeah, so those of you teaching are like, okay, right? This is not a recipe for success. So she called me. She was one of my former students. She said, what do we do? So I went in there and we looked and I asked, well, what are the students talking about when they're really excited? She says, the only thing that gets them excited is talking about life in East Los Angeles. So we got to have them write about that. So we created this curriculum called The Day in My Life, where I went in and I asked them, tell me about a day in your life. And I gave them these prompts. What's the first thing you see when you wake up in the morning? What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? All the senses. What happens on your way to school? What happens when you're at school? What happens when you come back? And it was a 2-hour block. And this funny thing happened. Every kid wrote. And they wrote and wrote and wrote. And one of the kids, a student whose name was Jose, he said, no one's ever asked me about a day in my life before. So we ended up writing and publishing these essays that the students wrote and revised multiple times. They did a digital film about their lives. We brought them to the university. And this is one of that group that all the students who did not move out of the neighborhood graduated high school 3 years later after this, and became a part of our summer programs, many of them. This became a part of the school. We ended up reproducing this in Boston, where the students ended up doing a kind of a spoken word theater around their essays on the day in their life. And they brought their headmaster, which is what they call the principal in Boston, in. And he was in tears at the end of that. Said, I've never seen anything like this more powerful in 25 years as an educator. All we had to do was ask the question. What does it mean to spend the day in your shoes? And in all the time since, this has not ever been met with anything but enthusiasm from kids, because someone actually cares to understand. What does it take? So some of the kids talked about having to hide behind the bus at the bus stop because the school was in like a border zone that was a war zone between neighborhoods, and they didn't want to get all their stuff stolen. Sometimes they would miss the bus because the bus would keep rolling because it didn't look like anyone was at the bus stop. As soon as they saw the bus, they would sprint out to catch the bus so that no one could rob them. That's important information for a teacher to know when you get to school. As my dad, who's a lifelong educator, we should congratulate them when they step on campus, because they're showing us all the motivation that we need to tap into if we are quality educators. So the kids will talk about this stuff, talk about taking care of siblings, talk about all the things that they're involved in, talk about their multilingualism, but we don't ask. One of the erroneous assumptions of American education is that kids come into school knowing nothing, and the things they know are bad and we need to get rid of them to make them become educated. But you ask kids about a day in their life, and you see they're doing all sorts of things that show how brilliant, how beautiful, how positive they are, how much energy and passion and love they have, right? A day in our life. This evolved into what they called the Critical Minds Project. They created this blog. That's the students, because their school was one of the schools featured in the Waiting for Superman movie. They didn't like the portrayal of themselves in that movie. So every time they went, they kind of busted open these shirts and like, we're our own Superman, right? So that's them, in their response. But, it went from asking them about a day in their life to, young youth blogging on the system and the Young Critical Minds Project. And as Deborah said, these kids have traveled all over the country talking about this work. Here's another example, the Auto-ethnography Project. This is the principal. You can see him celebrating. He should be, because he is the one who doubled the graduation rate at his school from 38% to over 80% in 5 years. I'm sure right now that it's peaking toward 90% in one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the Northeast. It rivals and compares with neighborhoods here in Michigan that I worked in, right? Or neighborhoods that I grew up in the Bay Area. One of the things that he had me do was develop a semester-long curriculum around what we call the auto-ethnography. So it begins with myself. So it's 18 weeks. We spend 6 weeks, myself, poetry, narrative, script. Then we go to my community. And so you begin to see how these issues that define myself that I talked about in my poetry or short stories are actually shared by the community. And then we look at it in terms of my world. So they put together these 35, 40-page research reports that had a combination of narrative writing, expository writing, argumentative, research-based essays, and it had a huge impact, right? We did it with 9th graders in their first semester. And so they would go from saying something like, these were the 2 questions the first year I did it, because we had them in gender-separate groups, so that was really important for this particular school in 9th grade. So with the girls, it was a lot about domestic violence and family. And for the boys, it was about neighborhood violence. They were both concerned about violence in different ways. So they moved from saying, why is it so hard for someone on my block to become an 18-year-old high school graduate, to survive to become an 18-year-old high school graduate? Was the question they might be asking in September. By the end of that semester, they would be talking about post-industrialism and joblessness in urban communities and white flight and middle-class flight and this factory that's closed down and socioeconomic factors and structural inequity. Right? 9th graders started from trying to explain what is happening on my block. My colleague, Jeff Duncan Andrade, who many of you may have heard of, he has this project called Doc Your Block. So he has these kids do documentaries of their block and connect it to larger social issues. And so all of a sudden, we're doing work that blends over into the math class as they start talking about demographics and crime statistics and that sort of thing. Understand that it's not just about me, right? My experiences are shaped by the larger social fabric. This is the group, the same grade. This is not the same year as the kids who did the Boycott the Ice Cream Man. This was a project that the teacher had called Art for Change. So students began to write plays and perform poems around the research they were doing in their community. So again, you can see the issue here for this particular group is violence. But these kids were at UCLA at the time. I brought them to campus in a similar event like this initiative, which I think is a great initiative, by the way. But we would bring kids to it. And so the kids put on this play, and they're talking about what's going on in their neighborhood, but they're doing it in kind of an interactive form of play acting that we will call theater of the oppressed, Augusto Boal's work. But these students were amazingly articulate, traveled around the state, and again, had great academic outcomes. We just had our annual conference at Columbia, where we call preemptive education, where we bring teachers and adults and community members and their spoken word and hip hop and youth research, and that was just this Thursday and Friday. We bring 600 kids out on a Friday night, and they have spoken word poetry slams right next to sociologists talking about research, and they're both talking about the same things, and they understand the language, right? Again, these kids are powerful academic outcomes that I'll share at the end. This is another project that we have going on right now. It's a youth historians in Harlem. We started this project 3 years ago at a school that had a D rating out of an A through F in New York Department of Education. A D is a pretty low grade. You can imagine what the socioeconomic status and demographics of the school were, right? In New York, and I know this is the case in Michigan too, just the sheer segregation of school systems. We have schools where there's not one white student. 10 miles away from schools where there is less than 1% African American Latino combined. New York boroughs and New York Metro. So this is a pretty hyper-segregated school in Harlem where we work. So one of our graduate students talks to the principal. He says, I want to do this project where young people become historians. We're going to have them do archival research. We're going to have them work with libraries and museums. They're going to come to the university, and it's going to be after school. And some of the teachers are looking at him like, okay, you go out to the town hall meeting. The principal is this amazing guy, and he says, yeah, let's do it. So my student Barry comes up and says, that spiel, and there is an overwhelming response from these kids. Right? 3 years later, that first group is applying to college now. They're applying to schools all over the Northeast. They work with professional historians. We have another conference coming up this week on the Educating Harlem, and we have a keynote speaker. But part of the program is these kids, these student historians. And they're writing a grant right now to present at the next American Educational Research Conference, which now has a whole segment on youth research based on the work that we've been doing. Right? So these kids are becoming historians of their own neighborhood. And they're working with adults and older folks, and what they're doing is an oral history project. They're collecting oral histories of people who've lived in the neighborhood. Think about with all the changes in Grand Rapids if you created an oral history project that was housed at Grand Valley or Calvin. And you had young people in the schools going out and interviewing all the folks who have spent their lives here in Western Michigan, talking about their lives and archiving their voices. So we have an excess demand. There are so many elders in the community who want to tell their stories. We don't have enough students to collect all the stories. And they're bringing in their yearbooks and sharing them, and we're trying to digitize all their yearbooks, and the kids are doing this research, and it's this amazing opportunity for cultural transmission. The kids are learning from their elders about the neighborhood history. The elders are getting to share their stories with the young people, and together they're fomenting this powerful connection of reading and writing. So we just, in our call for our conference, which is next week, we said, come and share your Harlem stories. And we've got, close to 300 people that are coming out, and we have a lunchtime, and they're sharing these stories, and we're going to try to get them recorded by the kids. So that blends into, this is another example, the Oral History Project. This one was in Los Angeles, where we had students read a book. Bless Me Ultima is a novel. It kind of talks about the duality of being a citizen in Mexico and a citizen in the United States, speaking Spanish, speaking English, feeling like you're in between two countries and not fully a part of either country. And a lot of the families felt that same tug. And so the students began to do these oral histories and stories of transmigration, right? And I know that Western Michigan is one of these spots of tremendous migration over the last several years. And how do we document these stories? How do we even use those stories as a way to facilitate conversations between kids and their parents and grandparents? So if you want more information on this, this is kind of how we help the kids learn how to do these interviews. We've done freedom and democracy speeches. Sometimes I share this, but it's too long a clip. It's a young girl, Angel. She's a 4th grader, talking about budget cuts. So we have the students pick a topic that they care about, they do research, and we have a speech festival where they offer their speeches. And then we think about places on the outward where they can share their speeches. So she gave this speech about budget cuts, and she is on point. This was a school that was in danger of being taken over in the state of California by the state because of low scores. After this intervention, this curriculum around freedom and democracy, the school actually outperforms the state average. These are some other slides from our high school students and some of the questions they're looking at. We have them work with college professors. It'd be great to have, the faculty at the local colleges actually working with some of these students in the neighborhoods on the work that they do. You see the kind of sophistication that they're talking about, the median household income. You see this in Michigan, right? I don't have to tell you that there are neighborhoods that are like this in this state, right? Where on one side of a street, you've got a socioeconomic status of 34,000. On the other side of that street, you have an average household income of 90,000. That street probably divides districts, right? Convenient, isn't it? This street would have both districts being integrated. This street has them both being segregated. This street divides the districts all the time around the country. It just happens, it's convenient, it happens that way. So the kids are saying, well, wait a second. Right? But look at the socioeconomic difference and the graduation requirements and the college going. There's this connection in our country between socioeconomic status and academic outcomes that we think is inevitable. If you look at the international test score data and people are saying the United States is falling, one of the simplest explanations for the fall in the United States is that we are one of the only industrial countries that has such a huge gap in achievement based on class. The other countries, either everyone's doing well or everyone's doing poorly, but they can't explain the United States. How do you have some kids doing so well and other kids doing so poorly when they're right next to each other? And it's hard for me to explain. It's like living in a house and having 8 kids and you feed 2 of them and the other 6 are kind of in the basement starving. Right? Either you feed them all, or that's how we operate as parents. That's how we operate as families. But we're not seeing ourselves as a family, right? How far do you have to go outside of Grand Rapids before you find a district that has a high socioeconomic status and almost universal high school graduation, college going? It's that way all over the country. So the kids are asking the question, why us? And why not us? But they're using research to do that. Right? They're using sociological research to do that. They're looking at, again, these are the graduation rates. They're conducting surveys in their neighborhoods and communities. Sorry, I don't know why it just dropped me out of that. They're doing professional level research. One of the things that, hopefully it takes, one of the things that we did was we had, I don't want to send it. We had professional researchers from colleges come in and evaluate the students. And so we wanted to demonstrate, is this just something hokey that we're doing, to make ourselves feel good, or is this actually quality scholarship? And, we've had a couple of evaluation studies. We certainly evaluate based on whether or not, the students are graduating school and test scores and that sort of thing. But one of the things that they found is that when young people and people from communities are doing research, the research is more genuine in some ways. But this was actually important information. It's not just an assignment for the kids to feel good about themselves. You actually had policymakers in the district and in the state taking this information up and saying, we need to do something about this. And that becomes important too. So again, like I said, they used demographic data, they looked at survey data. These are all slides produced by kids that I'm showing right now. This is not me. This is done by 13, 14, 15-year-olds. They look at grade distribution, dropout rates, push-out rates. They know how to do community profiles. This is the one that floored the mathematicians, right? They were able to use the My World Geographic Information software system, software, to document changes in the community as a result of white flight from the neighborhood, and then they were also able to correlate that with the high school yearbooks, looking at the services in those schools as the demographics changed. So blue is African American, red is Latino, anything that's a white or beige or green or brown is a form of white, except for a thin corridor of Asian American in the city. So this is what Los Angeles looked like in the 60s, most American cities. You look at the yearbooks of all of our central city schools in the 60s, and they're integrated schools, in the north, anyways. So this is what it looks like in 1970, right? And you know all the things that were going on, the riots in central cities, the Watts riots. Detroit had a couple of those in the 60s. Harlem had a couple of those. Every place had some of those. This is what it looks like in 1980, right? Complete flight from the district. This is what it looks like in 1990. So in 1990, this is when I got to this particular district, it's less than 10% white students in the district. And then they'll look back at the 1935 yearbook, like, they used to have orchestra at my school, right? They used to have glee club at the school. Now we have armed guards. What happens, right? What has happened to the schooling in this city? And they were able to connect socioeconomic explanations. That's powerful, but this is done by 16-year-olds in a supposed dropout factory of a school who supposedly don't care about their education, who are supposedly illiterate and illiterate. If I told you that a team of Stanford sociologists put together these graphs, you would have believed me. They're kids from the neighborhood, like your kids. And this is the kind of work they do when they're fired up about something. And you let them use technology, as Deborah and I were saying. I mean, they're kind of, natives at this thing. So this is what it looked like in 2000, basically complete abandonment of the central city school system, which is what you have to this day. It hasn't changed much. These are third graders here. And this is a youth summit that we had for elementary school students where we had them do research in their neighborhoods and come together. We brought them all together to the university and share their work. And this is one of the particular schools that I was working with. We asked them, this is what we did in it's the 60th anniversary of Brown. So we said, 60 years after Brown, do you think that American schools are better now than they were in 1954? And if so, how are they better? If not, how are they not better? What needs to change? Right? You think, oh, third graders aren't going to be interested in that question. Well, let's take a look. So these are all the third grader slides now. The next several slides I'll show. So the teacher used the informational text, which is kind of, that's a key word now, right? This story of Ruby Bridges. And these are the kids. So back in the days before we were born, there were people who were mean, and they treated people differently who looked different than them. This is a letter written by a third grader to the area superintendent, and she talks about what she doesn't like in her school. Lunch is nasty. We don't have enough paper. We don't have enough work either. But this part here, she talks about the research they did. We interviewed kids in the third grade. They said they didn't like the things in their school. We got a report card from the school, so they're looking at these multiple forms of data. School accountability report cards, like Michigan's Department of Education puts out, California does as well. But they said, well, that's not enough data. We want to actually interview people on campus, so they're becoming these researchers of their own neighborhood. Then they do an oral history where they talk to teachers and they talk to people who lived in the neighborhood during different eras in the post-Brown era. And then, I love this. Third graders are just too brutally honest. They haven't learned to talk like researchers. We would have figured out a way to kind of dress that language up a little bit. Our school and rich schools, right? You can order off a menu. They have grass. We don't have any grass. They have clean bathrooms. We both have teachers that we like. They put on a play, and they acted out that play. And again, these are kids that, the academic outcomes, are as positive as the social outcomes when they do this kind of work. So I'll just share a few more slides as a way of closing. This is research based on poetry, because now, with the standards, we need to have more research in our English, and English is my discipline. But I want the students to be still reading literature. So we read Langston Hughes' Dream Deferred. These are you probably recognize them more by the actual words and the title. But what happens to a dream deferred? And I told them they could do research however they wanted, any research question they wanted based on an interpretation of this poem. So this is just a couple of pictures of the students, and I'll share the research they did. This is what it looks like when you bring high school students to the college campus and give them a research assignment and say, you're going to share this research with the mayor. This picture is basically taken about 10 o'clock at night, the night before the presentations. And so they all have their laptops and their backpacks, and they're hard at work, and they're writing on the chalkboard, and this is what it looks like when they clean themselves up the next day and actually go speak to that mayor. And in the back, I love this picture, right? Because this young woman, Emily, who's now a student at UCLA, about to graduate, is at the podium where the mayor normally stands. And the mayor is sitting where people like Emily normally sit, listening to her. And in the back, it doesn't say, this is what I think. It says, these are my research questions. Right? And the mayor of Los Angeles at that time, Antonio Villaraigosa, he was in love with this work. But the kids interpreted the poem to say, what happens to a dream deferred is a way of talking about what happens to young people when society mistreats them. Because every kid is a dream. They represent someone's dreams. You know, I'll say this, no matter where I go to a campus on the first day of school in kindergarten and spot the high school dropouts. You can't find them because they do not exist. There are no high school dropouts amongst those kindergartners with their lunch buckets and their brand new spanking new shoes and running on the campus with so much excitement and glee. They're full of dreams. The dropout happens after we get a hold of them. They become dropouts. They're not born dropouts. Come home first day, what did you learn? I learned that I'm going to be a high school dropout. No, I learned the letter A. This is what it sounds like. Apple begins with A. Then something happens. 3rd grade, 4th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, all of a sudden that kid is sick in the morning, doesn't want to go to school, mom drops him off, he's hanging out with his friends. And then society wants to get interested in this kid and pay all sorts of money to lock him up for the rest of his young adult life. And the kids say, wait a second, what about when he was a dream? And he was deferred. And it just transformed the conversation in that city. Why not harness the dream instead of throwing money at the explosion? Is what our kids are asking us to do. So this is, you've already seen a couple of these slides in another form, but I just wanted to kind of revisit and give you the background context where the kids come up with this kind of stuff. Do you think that people in Palo Alto just have better dreams than people in South Central Los Angeles? Are they better dreamers in Grosse Pointe? Really? No. They just aren't having their dreams deferred. And that's where we step in as change agents and working with young people, right? The dreams are the same, just the quality of nurturing of those dreams are not. And that seems to me like the American crisis. Not our young people, not our communities. The crisis is that we don't nurture some people's dreams as well as we nurture others. And that's something to advocate around. Because all of a sudden, when you start nurturing those dreams, guess what happens? Those graduation rates go up. Those college entrance rates go up. The kids show you all the things that they were capable of doing in the first place. So the kids, they end their presentations with these demands that they make, right? Step into our shoes, engage in radical truth-telling, action plans for families and communities. And then they require people to do things, right? Learn, become involved in the kinds of things that this community literacy initiative is doing. They bring their parents in. So we have parents doing this kind of work that I talked about before with Mary Johnson, and this is one of her books here, Multicultural Parent Engagement Leadership Strategies Handbook, right, that you can get a hold of. You can get a hold of Mary, too, and the work that she's doing with parents. So what are some of the impacts? I've talked about some of these impacts. Increased academic literacy development, which is something I look at. This is actually helping kids to do better in school and creating better conditions in school because of the pressure we're putting on them. Increased graduation rates. There's absolutely no reason in a country as wealthy as America that any kid should not finish high school. There's absolutely no reason. I gave a talk every year when I was at UCLA. A group of people would come from Taiwan, and they were students, and I was talking, and they were fluent in English. And so I mentioned dropout, and I kept going, and they stopped me and said, well, wait a second, professor, what do you mean by drop out? Like, what does that word mean, right? This word what does it mean to drop out? And so I explained it to them, and they said, oh, so it's, a child decides not to go to school, and so the teachers are okay with this? Parents are okay with this? It's like, so it happens to a couple of kids? I was like, no, in this city it happens to 70% of them. Like, in America? Like, it was a pause, and I was ashamed at how we accept this. Like, But you're the wealthiest nation in the history of civilization. You've got 70% of kids in this wealthy city that are leaving school and no one is doing anything about it. Yes, I had to tell them yes. We are trying to do something about it, but that is exactly what we are allowing to happen in these United States of America. So increased graduation rates is one of the things that we look at for signs of success and health in a school system. The test scores, they have to take them. Right? And so we look at what happens on these scores. Greater enrollment in college prep courses, this is really important for me. Students willing to take a chance that they're enrolling in classes, and we have to get the schools ready for that, because schools have become used to teaching the kids that only are easy to teach in that class that they are kind of taught themselves already. So what does it mean to integrate AP classes and college prep classes? So we fight that battle all over the place. And increased access to college, which is something that communities always tell me they want. I was speaking at a church in Brooklyn a couple of weeks ago, and it was a hot Sunday in late August, early September in the borough of New York. And so I walk into this church on Flatbush in Brooklyn. If people know Brooklyn, it is packed. It is absolutely packed. Grandmothers, great-grandmothers, elementary kids sitting on the floor waiting for someone who works at a college in the city to talk about college access. And then I turn on the TV and hear people like, these communities don't care. Like, come to Flatbush, right? And you will see it. So we can't say college access doesn't matter to us because we're about social movements, and those people are like, no, I think my grandbaby needs to go to college. And you got to help her. And so that's one of the things that we look at, one of the measurements we have. Impacts on social change. Kids have met the president, the Barack Obama president, governors, mayors, right? They've changed federal and state legislation. I won't talk about the legislation, but like hunger strikes and movements have been like debated in Congress, and things are now laws based on some of the work that these kids have done. They've changed school policies. They've lobbied mayors and actually gotten support for the mayor. One of the outcomes of this particular interaction with the mayor was money for kids' jobs in the city, but their jobs being researchers and not just doing menial labor. So the kids got summer jobs in the city from the mayor's office for doing academic research. Bringing awareness to social issues ranging from environmental issues to transportation. Some of the kids in Boston called out the city buses because the city of Boston didn't have public school buses, so the city buses would pass certain neighborhoods and not stop. And so that they would make room for kids in other neighborhoods, and the kids were getting late to school and getting locked out of school. So they took this on, they challenged the policy. I mean, it happens everywhere, right? When no one's looking, people treat these kids pretty badly. And so the kids were like, I've been up since 5 o'clock. I can't do anything about the bus not stopping for me. So they were able to kind of bring awareness to these issues, adding artwork, helping major corporations become green, creating school-based clubs and organizations. In closing, I think there's another kind of an outcome that you cannot measure or quantify. And that is the joy of living a committed life, being a part of something. Right? We can talk about this in terms of the social change, but I think that these are the kids, right? This is us. I think we're in New Orleans at an event. But how do you put a price tag on that? Right? The feeling that you are a part of something that really matters, and that you are an actor upon the world, not just someone who is acted upon by the world. We should talk more about joy as an outcome. Right? Not the joy that comes after the struggle, because the struggle never eludes us. But as Mos Def says, it's a beautiful struggle. There should be joy in struggling together, working together. Love. This is a word that's seldom used in talking about literacy movements and teaching and learning. What's love got to do with it? Everything. Because absent love, all I have offered you is a series of techniques that will fall flat if you offer those techniques to people that have very little care about them in that particular context. Love is the missing ingredient to most of our social ills. You just cannot give up on people that you love. And so how do we make love a part of the movement in schools and out of schools? Out of schools, I'm not so worried about it. I mean, the love is there, but how do we make love a part of the conversation? I talk about love, people are like, that's not scientific. Yeah, but teaching is not just about science. We clarified that. Teaching is about an intimate engagement with young people. I have 3 children. Right now, all 3 of them are in school. Now, I don't expect at 6 o'clock in the morning the level of love for my children to be here, and at 2:15 in the afternoon it's here, because the people they are with say, it's not my job to love this child. Somebody better love my kid when my wife and I are not there in that child's presence, right? You work in the sacred public trust. I am trusting you with my child while I'm in Grand Rapids talking about literacy. That kid deserves to be loved, as do all kids. So us as educators, whenever you have someone's baby, someone's grandbaby, someone is like crying from heaven out of love for this child, it is a privilege. It is not a duty, but a privilege to have that kind of trust put in you. Love has everything to do with it. And that's what communities demand from us. Treat my child the way I would want my child to be treated if I were there. That child that I dressed this morning, I kissed, I drove, I'm at work. I could be doing all sorts of things at work that I hate. I'm doing them because I expect someone at school to be loving my child enough so that they don't have to do what I did. Which is my grandma says. I hope you don't have to do what I have to do. One of my grandmas picked strawberries till she was 80. My other grandma canned tomatoes till she was 76. Hoping that a public school system would do something with their grandbaby so that maybe he could be, standing talking to people in Grand Rapids with a PhD. Love has everything to do with it. So we want you, right, Grand Rapids, Western Michigan, be part of this national movement. There are people all over the country that are doing this, and I know you're doing it too, or else I wouldn't be here talking about these things. But we have to come together, right? We have to begin to talk together about this work. So Lindsay, who's not here, I hope that she's doing all right, asked me to talk about a couple things that are going on, like right this very minute, that you can be a part of or connect to, even if only virtually. One of them I talked about is this preemptive education conference where we bring the spoken word artists and the teachers together. And so this is, we just had it. It was this last Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But if you go on the website for my institute and kind of connect to this, or the organizers of it, they would be happy to say, these are some things we have going on, but maybe we could have a community literacy summit and the preemptive education conference be part of a dialogue together and say, nationally in September, this is kind of literacy and advocacy month, right? And this is what's going on in states across America. On Monday, that's a picture of me. It's very flattering that someone used that picture from over a decade ago. I'm happy to let that picture be used forever. I gave them a recent picture and they used that one. I was like, what are you trying to say? Right? But at any rate, that's a younger Ernest, right, from even the 20th century. But this is a conference that we're putting together. The calls to proposals you see starts today. Digital media and learning. It's in Los Angeles. But my strand is on digital literacy and youth civic engagement. And I'm inviting people from all over the country to come share your best ideas about what you have going on, what the young people are doing, and how we can leverage that information to fundamentally change the way society thinks about young people and to fundamentally change the way that we think about teaching young people. This is the AERA that I talked about, American Educational Research Association. Now they have this research to performance youth apprenticeship program. You can have young people coming to the AERA. You can raise money and have scholarships. We raise money every year in organizations like this to send to kids. But now they have a special place for them. So we're not just sneaking them in. They're actually like they're on the program. And the deadline is coming up in a couple weeks. This is something I'm a part of. People in Harlem have some strong opinions about what happened in Ferguson. And so we're at the Schomburg Center, which is our major center for research in Black culture. It's a library, myself and others. But the whole community's coming together to think about, what does this mean for us? It's easy to say Ferguson, right? It's harder to say Harlem or Western Michigan. And what are we doing here to perpetuate the same kind of ills, right? So the folks are out there kind of working on it. So these are 4 things just this week, right, that are going on right now with our institute and the work that we're doing. So I'm going to end with a quote from a mentor of mine, and it just doesn't get any simpler than this. I've never encountered any children in any group who are not geniuses. There's no mystery on how to teach them. The first thing you do is treat them like human beings, and the second thing you do is love them. Thank you.
Dr. Morrell, our committee has decided to present you with the gift of art, uniquely created by Georgia Taylor, Summit resident designer, graphic artist, fine art painter, and an awarded member of our rich local art community.
I just want to say just a couple of quick words about what this piece means to me and what I was thinking when I created it. Yeah, you can just stand there.
Oh, sure, I can do it.
Thank you. One thing that you said when you were speaking that really resonated with me, being a local artist and educator here in Grand Rapids, you said teaching is an intimate transaction to help people become a different person. And this piece that is entitled Coming Into Being is talking about exactly that, the process of giving yourself over to change. And I'm just going to read a quick statement about what I was thinking. We all experience times in life that forever change and shape us. Life is constantly in motion and we evolve along with it. Even though the changes in life can be challenging, there is an opportunity to become better afterward. The abstract shapes and the colors that you see in Coming Into Being represent the beauty that can come from personal growth when we give ourselves over to the process of change. I believe the most beautiful moments in our lives often happen when no one is looking, in those places that are hidden from public view. Embracing change has the potential to result in something unexpectedly vibrant. So this is our gift to you, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Morrell, and thank you, Georgia and Wendy. My name is Kristen Brace. I'm the coordinator for the Community Literacy Initiative. Dr. Morrell shared stories about community-changing grassroots work being done by seemingly ordinary people. And that's part of the reason why CLI holds this summit every year, to celebrate the amazing work that all of you are doing to lift up literacy and to empower individuals in our community. So this year, we took it one step further by putting out a call for nominations for Community Literacy Awards in 4 different categories: Inclusion, Innovation, Volunteer of the Year, and Talent. Our committee had an incredibly difficult time coming up with just the finalists, and today we'll actually be announcing the winners. And to do that, we have 2 facilitators with us today, 2 special guests who I'm pleased to introduce, both John Robinson and Wendy Falb. John Robinson is the Principal, Executive Director, and Superintendent for the Grand Rapids Child Discovery Center. He is also the Education Consultant for Jewish Theater Grand Rapids and an actor for KMR Diversity Theater. John is a facilitator for Awaken the Ego, Discover Your Spirit, trained by the program's founder, Dr. David Muchler. Previously, John served the Grand Rapids Public Schools as an assistant principal for instruction, a disciplinary literacy math coach, and a math teacher. He also was formerly the assistant director for the Grand Rapids Pre-College Engineering Program at Davenport University. John was a Rackham Fellowship recipient at the University of Michigan, where he received his MA in Education and a secondary teaching certificate. Dr. Wendy Falb is a graduate of Calvin College, Boston College, and Michigan State University. She was a college English instructor for 8 years and has served on the GRPS Board of Education since 2009. She has 2 sons who attend GRPS, and her first day as Executive Director of the Literacy Center of West Michigan was September 8th, 2014. Thank you, John and Wendy.
Thank you for that warm introduction, and thank you all for having us as part of the presentation and this important work. I want to encourage you to read the information about all of the finalists in your summit folders, including their complete bios for the winners announced today. Some nominees offered a statement that further explains how their work fits the award category, so we encourage you to look at those. The Innovation Award. The Innovation Award will be awarded to an organization that has made outstanding and measurable contributions in increasing literacy levels and has demonstrated exceptional and sustained depth and breadth in its commitment to the advancement of literacy. The organization will meet the highest standards in its creative solutions to overcome barriers and demonstrate effective collaboration toward improved literacy. This award may be given to any organization based in West Michigan. The Innovation Award finalists are Cook Library Center, Helen DeVos Children's Hospital, Hispanic Center of West Michigan, West Michigan Refugee Education and Cultural Center. The recipient, Helen DeVos Children's Hospital, and it will be accepted by Sarah Smith. As the hospital teacher and educational liaison, Sarah has the privilege of helping bridge the gap between the medical team and the school systems. When a child is hospitalized, much of life's normalcy is put on hold. As part of the Child Life team, the hospital school program works to establish routines and bring a glimpse of normalcy into the lives of their patients. Kids love school, and they work to foster that love for learning by providing opportunities for kids to get creative and be curious.
I just want to thank you so much. As an organization that promotes healthcare in the communities that we serve, it's really an honor to even be considered as a nominee for a literacy award. So thank you, and thank you to all the people in our community, our volunteers, the West Michigan Therapy Dogs, Kent District Library, Kent ISD, and all the area schools that we partner with to help make sure that our kids have some normalcy while hospitalized. Thanks.
The Inclusion Award. The Inclusion Award will be awarded to an organization that has made outstanding and measurable contributions in increasing literacy levels and has demonstrated exceptional and sustained depth and breadth in its commitment to the advancement of literacy. The organization will meet the highest standards in creative solutions to carry out literacy services through the lens of equity and inclusion, reaching out to diverse communities. This award may be given to any organization based in West Michigan. And the finalists are Early Learning Neighborhood Collaborative, Plaza Communitaria, SLD Reed. And the recipient is Early Learning Neighborhood Collaborative, accepted by Nkechi Eza. The Early Learning Neighborhood Collaborative, ELNC, began as an initiative funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Changing the current reality for vulnerable children is the mission that drives the collaborative organization. ELNC has designed and currently implements an intentional preschool service system that strives to provide, expand, and sustain the capacity of high-quality early care and education programs in the most vulnerable neighborhoods of Grand Rapids.
Wow. Thank you so much for this award. We are so excited. You know, Dr. Morrell talked about take the question to the community. Don't do things for them. And that's exactly what ELNC did. We asked our neighborhood, what do you need for your children? They want just what everybody else wanted for their kids. quality preschool program so that their kids can be ready for kindergarten. You see, in our neighborhood, only 2 out of 10 children have access to quality preschool program. No wonder 83% of them are not ready for kindergarten. And we know that when you're not ready for kindergarten, you're not ready for life. So we took it out to the community, and they really embraced it. We don't really want to be up here receiving this without the group that makes us a collaborative. It's not one organization. It's Baxter Community Center, Hispanic Center of Western Michigan, Steepletown Neighborhood Services, and I better not forget anybody, CCOM, New Hope Baptist Church, The Other Way Ministry, and United Methodist Community House. Together, we are really trying to change the status quo. And that is that every child deserves the best. And we thank you so much, Literacy Center, for helping us, Kenny Intermediate School District for being behind us, Grand Rapids Public School. We couldn't have done it really without you guys' help. And everybody that have really stepped up to mother these children. That's what we're trying to do, the whole community embracing all these children. And we are making gains because as of this year, we have literally created over 423 preschool slots in a neighborhood that we wouldn't have had any. And the best news yet is that as of last year, when we received our children, they were really testing at 49%. 49% in reading. They were not ready, developmentally not ready. At the mid-year, around March of last year, we tested them. They were scoring at 66%. And by June of last year, they were scoring at 85%. And the reason why they're doing that is that we are loving them. Our environment is culturally competent. A classroom that don't have teachers that look like our kids, we hire the parents that look like them so that when the children come, their brain are relaxed and they're able to work. So thank you so much for everything. We really appreciate this.
The Volunteer of the Year Award. The Volunteer of the Year Award will be awarded to an individual that has made outstanding contributions in increasing literacy levels and has demonstrated exceptional and sustained depth and breadth in his or her commitment to the advancement of literacy. The individual will meet the highest standards in his or her commitment to community spirit, advocacy, dedication, and effectiveness. This award may be given to any individual living and working in West Michigan. The finalists are Michelle Downer, Sister Joyce Ann Herzig, Denise Joseph, Katie Enting. And the recipient is Denise Joseph, and accepting on her behalf is Accepting on her behalf is Shay Crayley. What do you get when you take an avid reader, writer with 35 plus years as a special ed teacher, teacher consultant, and combine her with a devotion to and passion for literacy? Denise Joseph. In 2007, after starting with her first Literacy Center of West Michigan adult tutoring program student, Denise also became certified as a National Writing Project Teacher Consultant through our local Lake Michigan Institute. In 2012, after retiring from Comstock Park Schools, she earned her TESOL certificate in Barcelona, which prepared her for her AmeriCorps service at the Literacy Center of West Michigan as a Schools of Hope family literacy teacher.
I had a speech prepared, but I lost it, and I'm a very strong C on the disc, so you know how traumatic that is for me. But Denise couldn't be here today because she is globetrotting through Eastern Europe right now, but I did get a chance to ask her if she wins this award, what she would like me to say on her behalf, and she said in the unusual case that I win this award, I want you to say thank you, and that my students humble me and I learn from them every day. So on behalf of Denise Joseph, thank you very much.
The Talent Award. The Talent Award will be awarded to an individual that has made outstanding contributions in increasing literacy levels and has demonstrated exceptional and sustained depth and breadth in his or her commitment to the advancement of literacy. The individual will meet the highest standards in his or her literacy contribution to the field. In other words, poetry, essays, articles, stories, storytelling, and so forth. This award may be given to any individual living and working in West Michigan. And the finalists are Jack Riddle and Shingi Mavima. And this year's recipient is Jack Riddle. Accepting on Jack's behalf will be Kristen Brace. Jack Riddle's latest collection is Practicing to Walk Like a Heron, Wayne State University Press, 2013. It was named one of the year's 2 best poetry collections by Forward Reviews, the American Library Association. His collection, Broken Symmetry, Wayne State University Press, was co-recipient of the Society of Midland Authors Best Book of Poetry Award for 2006. His collection, Losing Season, Kevin Carey Press, follows a small town through a long winter and a long season with its losing high school basketball team. The collection was named the Best Sports Book of the Year for 2009 by the Institute for International Sport, and the Boston Globe named it one of the 5 best books about sports.
It's really an honor for me to accept this award on Jack's behalf. He is sorry that he cannot be here today. I had the privilege of learning poetry in college from Jack Riddle, and if you read the biography, you'll note that he has over 85 published students, former students. And the thing about Jack is that he didn't just produce students who produce poetry. He truly loved his students and created an atmosphere in his classrooms and beyond that really just nurtured everyone's individuality, and he just helped me and so many others grow as poets and as people. So it's an honor to accept this for him. Thank you.